Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 77 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with Derek Hunter, Daily Caller podcaster, pundit, and author of the great new book, Outrage, Inc. Hunter's first book would have been timely at any point during the age of Trump. This month, yikes. This week's show is sponsored by Full Frontal with Samantha Bee. Tune in for the hate comedy. Stay because our advertisers sure won't. Before my chat with Derek, I want to share some thoughts about a trip I took to New York recently. Now, I grew up on Long Island, and most of my accent is gone, although it does peek out now and then. So the trip really served as a memory lane jaunt, and I have to say, it really did the trick. I had my black and white cookies and had a lot of other stuff that I used to feast on back in the day. But one of the things that really struck me about my visit was walking through Times Square. Of course, you couldn't help but notice all the advertising around the city, all the big banners and posters and billboards and all those massive epic places that just showed what's coming out in theaters near you soon, or even what's coming out to Amazon streaming and other services like that. I couldn't even begin to think of all the big money that Hollywood had to lay out to get that advertising in place. I mean, massive billboards alone. And then, of course, all the posters, all the different advertisements, the moving, breathing posters sometimes with people kind of walking around advertising different product. It's just everywhere. Huge business. And yet at the very same time, Hollywood is alternately pushing people away. It's amazing. Their rhetoric has been so angry, so divisive, so anti-half the country. Now, we've talked about this topic before, so this isn't breaking news, but it's also just the oddest business model possible. And walking through the streets of New York really reminded me about that. And then, of course, a few days ago, we had that vile series of tweets from Peter Fonda. Not only will his new movie come out unchanged, but the movie company basically said, yeah, we think it's reprehensible too, but nothing's going to happen. No one is going to stop hiring him at any point, given the things that he said about the Trump family and about other members of the administration. It's staggering. And yet, who else did we hear from this week? Chris Pratt was at the MTV Movie Awards presentation, picking up a statuette of some kind, and his acceptance speech just went viral. Why? Well, he talked about God and his faith, and certainly you don't hear that super often in the way that he said it at any award ceremony. There's often shout-outs to God, for sure, no problem there, and that's not exactly rare. But what he said was a little bit different, but I wanted to focus on more about other things he said during his speech. Yes, he mentioned some sort of colorful language, but he also talked about thanking the fans for making his fame possible. Wow! How often do we hear that these days? Usually when an actor comes up to making a speech, giving a kind of accept an award, what we hear is, well, I hate Trump because of this. Oh, we need more immigration. All these different stump speeches disguised as acceptance speeches. Well, how about thanking people? Either the fans, your fellow coworkers. Often that gets pushed aside because people want to make their speech. Can we clone Chris like we clone the dinosaurs in Jurassic World? We need more stars like him, charismatic, kind, and constantly thanking the audience for letting him live the life he's living. Now, I don't know Chris personally. He could be kind of a jerk. He could be a great guy. No clue. But as a movie actor and as a star, he's second to none. You know, the best part about him, all that positive outrage, those good vibes, those thank you messages, they don't cost a penny. Meanwhile, the rest of Hollywood, the big studios, are shelling out millions and millions of dollars on messaging that some of their biggest stars are crushing personally. You know, at some point someday, a Variety, a Hollywood Reporter, maybe even Deadline.com is going to do a story about this bizarre situation that's going on in the industry right now. And I hope they do so before the industry's name gets permanently buried by its most toxic stars and their horrible, horrible comments.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
Here's a celebrity tweet of the week. This week's winner is Cynthia Nixon. She's the Sex and the City star now running hopelessly behind Governor Andrew Cuomo for New York's big race. Now, she's a progressive for sure, just like Governor Cuomo is, but she's really working overtime to gin up her far-left bona fides. Need proof? Here's what she said this week on Twitter. ICE is a terrorist organization, and its egomaniacal leader is Donald Trump. Sign our petition to abolish ICE now. Well, at least she didn't play the Hitler card. Yet. Let's do one more.
Don't touch that dial. You're listening to my daddy's podcast.
My hit tip of the week is Lady Bird. Now is the perfect time to catch up with that movie, which came out late last year. Why? Well, all the Oscar hype has basically died down at this point. You know, it wasn't really an Oscar-worthy movie in the first place. It delivered tart dialogue and real emotions, great acting as well. That combination is growing increasingly rare on the big screen. The amazing Saoirse Ronan stars as a teen about to leave for college, but she's bickering and fighting with her mom, played by the great Laurie Metcalf. She's also got some boy troubles, too. Pretty typical stuff, but, you know, it's just how it's all displayed. It's smart, it's thoughtful. There's also a very interesting look at faith in the movie that ties into the modern culture, but also talks about the enduring power of faith. It didn't sugarcoat people going to the church, nor did it mock them. I thought that approach was really introspective, interesting, and fresh. You don't see it too often these days. Now, Lady Bird isn't a monumental achievement. It wasn't robbed of a Best Picture Oscar. It's just very, very good. All the more reason to stream it now on Amazon Prime. Now let's get to the HitCast feature interview. For a short time, I edited op-ed columns from Eric Hunter. I'd contact him via email, we'd agree on the topic, and in record time he'd send me these really long, smart, sprawling stories that I couldn't believe came about so quickly. Dude writes fast. He's also a very quick mind, as evidenced by his new book, Outrage, Inc. It tackles the left's stranglehold on science, journalism, and Hollywood. Spoiler alert, it ain't pretty. It is an essential read, though, an exhaustive look at how the biases entrench in these elemental parts of our culture. It's amazing, it's depressing, but you got to check it out. I hope you'll find our chat a bit essential, too. Here's my interview with Derek Hunter. First of all, welcome to the show, Derek. You know, I loved your new book, but what really jumped out at me about the book, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, is the media bias chapters, which are significant in the book. I didn't realize it was this bad. Now, I spend a lot of time looking at media bias. I read Newsbusters. I write for them. I write about it at my site. I just, when you put it all together, it's still kind of shocking to me. So I was kind of wondering, from your perspective, did you have a similar sense of discovery? Did you know it was this bad? And when you're kind of writing the book, did it all kind of come together for you?
Well, I knew it was bad, and I've been an avid reader of Newsbusters for a long time, and thank you for having me on, Christian. I've been an avid reader of Newsbusters, and I think that the Media Research Center is the best thing to happen to media and for conservatives, even more so than the invention of Fox News. But when I was looking for examples, I didn't want to come up with something that everybody had sort of beaten to death, and I wanted to go a little bit more in depth. And there's always something when you know me, I'm on Twitter constantly, and things just stick in my craw. And so I started bookmarking tweets, and I started bookmarking stories for research. And when I went back to sort of assemble these chapters, I had all these blaring examples, and it did kind of occur to me, like, holy cow, this is a lot worse than I thought. It's not just the ones that everybody's talking about. It's the fact that if you see Time or Newsweek on Twitter, you think that they're obsessed with celebrities, and they're really not. It's bias by proxy. Nobody cares what Chrissy Teigen really thinks, but it gives the journalists who write for Time magazine an opportunity to voice opinions they clearly hold. You can tell by what they write in between writing up the tweets that Chrissy Teigen just goes and is a little more blatant, or Samantha Bee, for example, is a little more on the nose, and it frees up the reporters to say what they've always wanted to say without them having to be the ones say it.
Yeah, that was a revelation that you have in your book that I was embarrassed that I didn't quite get. Like, I should have come up with that, but you say it so eloquently. It's just them letting them say the words without getting in trouble for saying the words. But, one thing, you touch on this in the book, and you mentioned how it played into the research, but Twitter is the absolute worst venue for today's journalists. Every fear you have about their biases is right in front of you on your Twitter feed. Don't they realize that? I mean, isn't there any sort of self-awareness within the industry, or is the bubble that thick at this point?
Well, one of the things I write about in Outrage Incorporated is we've blurred the line between famous and infamous. We haven't even just blurred it, we've obliterated it. And now it's about getting attention. And in the media business, it's no different. It's getting clicks, it's getting followers. That gets you marketable. If you have enough followers, you'll get booked on television. If you get booked on television, you could get a better job. You might get a job with that television network. So there isn't much thought of it beyond the selfish, immediate thought. There is no thought of, I'm a reporter, I probably shouldn't make this wisecrack. I'm a reporter, I probably shouldn't express this opinion publicly. It's one thing to your friends over a glass of wine on the weekends. It's something entirely different to your 80,000 followers that can be retweeted 20,000 times. And we've lost sight of that. It's now so much of society is about simply getting attention without any regard for whether or not it's good attention or bad attention. It's just attention. It's followers. It is clicks. So if you put a celebrity's name in a headline, you might get more clicks. And that leads to more bias by proxy, which is the name of that title, about the way that reporters report on insignificant celebrities because they say what the reporters wish they could say. It's social media. It's a phenomenon. It's sad because I love journalism. I love the news. I love having access to information, but normal biases were always there. Social media shined both a magnifying glass on it and magnified it.
And it's interesting because I think they're all playing the short game. I understand the clicks. I mean, I run a website, and my headlines will be a little bit more clickbaity than I would like. But I hope that my content will back it up, or at least, as once you get into the story, you'll feel like it's something compelling and good to read. But right. I feel like journalists are deeply concerned with their image and about their reputation while chasing the clicks and chasing away readers and credibility. It's a weird 1-2 step, and I mean, we're not talking about 20-year-olds. These people, 40s, 50s, and 60s, still doing this routine. Is there any sense that there's a horror of what's coming down the road to them, or do you think they're just sort of all caught up in the now and they don't care about tomorrow?
I think they're all caught up in the now, as we've seen with just this week with Brian Stelter and CNN speculating wildly about where in the world is Melania Trump. Suddenly she became Carmen Sandiego. And it became some sort of scandal where they started speculating wildly about where she could be. There's nothing about what could happen that is news by the definition of the word. It's rampant speculation. It is people guessing. It is people's opinions. But Brian Stelter went with it anyway. And then when confronted with it, he spent 3 days on social media trying to defend himself as saying it was only 3 minutes. We barely talked about it. It doesn't matter. But you don't understand. 3 minutes on a television show that's an hour long. When you cut out commercials, it's 44 minutes long. That's an eternity on television. Plus the internet, it lives forever. I don't know that they're not aware of it or if they don't care. I think it's probably a little from column A and a little from column B. I think the older journalists are unaware of it. And they tend to step in the bear traps less frequently. But the younger people in their 20s and 30s, and there's an alarming number of people in charge of bringing us news who are in their 20s, fresh out of college, they simply don't care. They might get a talking to from their bosses, but it hasn't really cost anybody their jobs yet. And it's probably going to take that to get the credibility back. But I don't know that they want the credibility back, Christian. They're getting clicks. The Trump administration has been great for the news business. Viewership is up, readership is up, the traffic is up. So they think this works, and it may work, but it's damaging to their credibility. So a lot of people might read their stuff, but they do it with contempt, and it just breeds more contempt. And you see that the media is held in incredibly low esteem right now. not by accident, and it's earned. It's well earned.
I often joke on Twitter, I think we're going to look back to 2018 as the golden era of journalism, because I think it's kind of falling that badly. I want to talk a little bit about Bill Nye the Science Guy and maybe get your perspective on him, because you kind of deep dive into his past, what he's been up to, and just share for our listeners kind of a sneak peek at what you talk about in Outrage, Inc.
Well, Bill Nye the Science Guy is a moral voice, a voice of authority to the mainstream media on every issue regarding gender, regarding equality, regarding climate change, but he's not a scientist. He was a failed stand-up comic who got a show on a local PBS station that ended up becoming national. Now, when he was Bill Nye the Science Guy back in the 90s, he was pretty harmless. He just did general science experiments. This is how gravity works and things like that. It was educational. But once that show ended, he somehow rebranded himself with the help of journalists, because he was on their team, as an expert. And the science became his calling card, even though he's got an engineering background. It's certainly a science, but it's not climatology, for example. Yet when he speaks, he is granted the authority of the media of being somebody who spent their life really working hard and studying these issues. And he's become a rock star, a go-to type person in the media. Same goes for Neil deGrasse Tyson. Look, he's an astrophysicist. He's way smarter than I am. But being an astrophysicist does not make you a climatologist. Yet when the issue of climate change comes in, the media, they'll seek out the opinion of Neil deGrasse Tyson, not because he has any special knowledge on it. His expertise is the vacuum of space. It doesn't have much to do with the atmosphere. It's the opposite of the atmosphere, in fact. Yet he is stamped with the credibility of being Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, famous scientist. They don't really mention the astrophysicist part very often. And whatever he says goes. But what they say, both of them, is not really science. You remember, Christian, back in the 90s and the 2000s when Al Gore was running around making a lot of money, telling everybody that we have 10 years to address this problem or it's too late. Well, it's been 20 years since he said we had 10 years, and we don't have coastal flooding, we don't have massive problems. So one of the things that the climate change true believers did, and I refer to them sort of as a religion, and Al Gore as Pope Gorus IV, is they've changed the window of predictions. If I tell you, Christian Toto, that the world is ending Sunday, come Monday, you're going to have some questions for me. That window in climate change, when it was global warming, has long since closed. So instead of people saying, hey, wait a second, you predicted doom and gloom by now and it hasn't happened, maybe you're not up to date, up to speed on everything, they instead move the goalpost to now making 100-year predictions, so that nobody will be around to remember they made their doom and gloom predictions. And we must cede our liberty now to government because of something that might happen in 100 years. It's a masterstroke of PR that nobody would be able to get to in any other field or any other political belief system. And being spearheaded in the media are these, Neil deGrasse Tyson is a scientist, but they're pseudoscientists, they're pseudo-climatologists who know nothing more than what they've read in the Associated Press story. Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't spend his time doing climate research for NASA on the weekends just for fun. Neither does Bill Nye. Bill Nye wouldn't be qualified to do it anyway. But their word is gospel, their word is bond, and we're expected to accept it by a media that does wholeheartedly because they agree with it. And that's really what it boils down to. They're on the right team, so they're elevated as a source of knowledge to sort of give it a stamp of credibility that it doesn't necessarily deserve.
We're speaking with Derek Hunter, the author of the great new book, Outrage, Inc. Now, we just went through an election cycle. It feels like yesterday, though. I guess it's a year and a half or so ago now, where Hollywood did whatever it could to drag Hillary Clinton across the finish line, and they failed. And I was kind of curious, from your perspective, does that mean the industry's clout is waning? Is that when they put out a new PSA, when they have a new mission, that we're listening less and less? Or do you think that maybe it just Trump is so unique and such a purple unicorn that nothing sticks to him, and those tactics may work down the road.
I don't know that those tactics have ever really worked for more than a hot moment. If you remember 2004, Fahrenheit 9/11 was out. It was a huge success. Michael Moore's hat tip to Leni Riefenstahl in the propaganda world. It was a huge success, but still George W. Bush won. The left doesn't spend as much time trying to convert people as they do trying to keep the choir in line. When they try to convert people, they do it much more subtly. During the Bush years, again, there was an endless string of anti-war movies, each less successful than the last. Anti-war movies, unlike anti-war movies in the past, about a war that was actually currently happening in Iraq. And each one bombed at the box office. The American people, while they didn't love the war, weren't in the mood to go and get preached to in a movie theater. Nobody wants to pay $12 to sit in a movie theater to be preached to by a multimillionaire about how they have to live their lives. They'll save being preached to for Sundays. And that didn't deter Hollywood from making those movies. 2007 saw an endless string of Hollywood bombs that were anti-George W. Bush, anti-Iraq war. Weirdly, curiously, the pace at which those movies were made changed dramatically to a trickle after 2008. I can't remember what happened in 2008, but something must have happened. We must have had some kind of election where Barack Obama won and the anti-war movement disappeared. So no, I don't think that Hollywood is ever going to learn their lesson. I don't think Hollywood is ever going to stop. They can make an Avengers movie, which I love, and I saw 3 times the weekend it came out, or a Deadpool 2, and make $1 billion, and that allows them to throw $20, $30 million at some passion project that has a message that will find a life on net. Netflix will pick it up. HBO will run it. It'll be on Amazon Prime and Hulu. You can find all of these things. They'll find an audience. They're not made for profit. They're made for messaging. It's an in-kind donation, really.
Sort of the flip side of this, I was at, Amy Schumer spoke at the March for Our Lives a few weeks ago, and she admitted that her political activism is costing her at the box office. And then almost to prove her point, her movie I Feel Pretty underwhelmed and didn't make nearly what her movie Trainwreck did a couple of years ago. But as much as I disagree with her politics, I appreciated her candor. But I feel like that there are very few people who will say that openly or even act upon that reality. At what point do the stars start caring? Because I'm thinking, Hollywood is all about the franchises and the brand names and the superheroes. You could plug any old guy into the Batcape and the movie's going to do well. You don't need Ben Affleck. So I would think that, stars are always skittish about their future because it's a very tough business in the first place. Now, if they get political, they could chase people away and make themselves even less marketable. When do they start caring? When is that sort of reality hit? Because they don't act like it.
Well, someone like Ben Affleck has more money than he's ever going to know what to do with. So he doesn't ever have to care. There's that sweet spot, and you know this from being a Hollywood guy for a long time and following this industry better than I do, that from about 20 to about 35 for a woman and for 20 to maybe 50 for a guy is their sweet spot, and then they have to take certain types of different roles. But once you've made 5 movies where you've gotten between $15 and $20 million, you suddenly become liberated. So you care less because you can still always get $10 million. Look at Jim Carrey. He's lost his complete mind, or whatever he had of it. He doesn't care. He's digging his own career grave because he's sitting on a pile of money. Some of the younger actors and actresses do it, I think, because they want to get the attention. They want to be a part of the in crowd. Maybe they believe it. We're not dealing with people who went to college or got a PhD or anything. Many of them didn't graduate high school. They're doing just fine. But they know what the crowd wants. They know what the producers want. They know what the industry supports. So they go along with it. I don't know if they ever change. I would have said 2 weeks ago the Roseanne resurgence might have served as a little bit of a wake-up call that, hey, there's an entire half of the country that we're not only ignoring, we're insulting. And if we just maybe toned it down a little, we could get some of their money too. But then Roseanne imploded, and ABC before that had decided that they were going to try and tamp down the politics in that show anyway. So maybe they'll never learn. They're making less money than they have in the past. Last year was one of the lowest attended movie years in 25 years, but they're still making money hand over fist. It just happens to be less than the previous year. And if I made $100 million last year and I was only going to make $90 million this year, I'm not sure I would learn a whole lot. I'd still be quite content with $90 million, Christian.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of incentive to it. I will say this, though, if you will allow me, because I've written about this a lot on Town Hall, about how we need to get engaged in the culture war, and this is your website. But so many of conservatives out there, and I see it in the comment section, and yes, I do read the comment section sometimes, they'll say, I canceled cable. I don't watch TV. I don't go to the movies. And they do it sort of with a weird pride. But we can't cede that. If you cede those venues of entertainment, you're ceding the culture war. As Andrew Breitbart, who we both knew, said, politics is downstream from culture. You have to be engaged in the culture war. You don't have to like it. You don't have to go see every movie, but you can't stick your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist and declare victory because you aren't engaged in it. That just means you lost the culture war. And ultimately, to win in politics, we're going to have to start at least getting some victories in the culture war.
What would you consider a victory in the culture war?
Most of the victories, sadly, are accidental. One of the most conservative movies was made by one of the most liberal directors, and that's Knocked Up. It's a very pro-life message, not on purpose. It was done for comedic effect, but the single woman gets pregnant, and she could have had an abortion, but she decided to have the child and give it a go with the baby's father, and it was a very pro-life message. On the other side, though, I don't want to name any specifics, but you watch a lot more movies than I do. And when a conservative makes a movie and it's billed as a conservative movie, or I'll use a music example. The band Madison Rising, I mentioned this in the book. They came around probably about 8 years ago. They started showing up at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. And people were excited. Ooh, a conservative rock and roll band. Ooh, a conservative rock and roll band. The problem was they were terrible. They forgot to rock. Yes, they had all these wonderful messages in their music, but nobody wanted to listen to their music. The most important thing, conservatives tend to, I have a message I want to convey. Let's find a way to hammer that message into a movie or into a book or into a song, rather than say, I have a really good song. And if it happens to convey a message, that's fine. Just be conservative. The most important thing entertainment can do is entertain, not hammer somebody over the head with a message. Madison Rising forgot the number one rule of a rock band, and that was to rock. So they didn't go anywhere. They're conservative, but they suck. And it's much more important to not suck than it is to be conservative, quite frankly. You can sneak things in there. You can also be these things, but you don't do your craft to convey a message. You just happen to convey a message while perfecting your craft. U2 is a liberal band, but they don't hammer people over their head with their message. They make really good songs, and some of them happen to convey messages. Conservatives have to understand that the craft of storytelling, the craft of entertaining, is more important than the message. Once you get the ability to entertain down, you can almost convey any message you want. They just have it backwards.
Yeah, the recent movie A Quiet Place is a beautiful testament to the what a parent will go to, the lengths they'll go to protect their children. But that wasn't really the theme. It was there are monsters that are attracted to sound, and we got to be quiet. But that was what you kind of came away with in a more subtle way. And that was a beautiful way to kind of tell that story without kind of hitting it over the head. Derek, I had one last question. I was kind of curious, are there any celebrities out there that you admire for their activism that maybe do it right, either responsibly, their message is sober and clear-headed, or even just generally speaking, even if you don't agree with them, you tend to listen when they speak?
I appreciate the honesty. I don't know that I admire them for their activism because there's always a tinge of hypocrisy behind it. I have no doubt that Leonardo DiCaprio deeply believes in his environmental causes, but he also jets to his press conferences in a private plane stocked fully with champagne and Victoria's Secret models. Nothing against Victoria's Secret models. The more of them in the world there are, the better the world will be. But flying to receive an award for protecting the environment on a private jet is a little bit hypocritical. And so in that sense, no, there isn't really anybody I admire. I admire their work. They're all incredible at their jobs, and I enjoy their films. Their activism, less so. I appreciate the honesty of a Mark Ruffalo, though, although he's crazy. He doesn't try to hide it. He is what he is, and he plays a fine Bruce Banner in the Marvel universe, which I love. So in that sense, as long as they're honest, I don't really care what they believe and what they advocate for. I'll take them on the battlefield of ideas, and then I'll sit down and watch one of their movies. And you have to, as a conservative, you have to be able to separate the two, because otherwise you're just going to watch Lawrence Welk reruns on the weekend on VHS, and that's pretty much all we're going to have.
That's right. And that whole VHS to DVD transition is really tricky, so you don't want to kind of go there. But,
right.
Well, Derek, thank you for joining the HitCast. Please pick up Derek's new book, Outrage, Inc. It is a really smart takedown of modern liberalism on a lot of fronts, including Hollywood, the media, and science. You can also listen to Derek at his Daily Caller podcast and read his work at townhall.com. Derek, always a fun time to speak to you, and hopefully we can do it again.
I appreciate you having me on, Christian. Have a great day.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.